Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, I'm going to be putting together a boss guide for Jamanra the Abomination. This is the boss of Act 2 in Path of Exile 2, and this boss is also, during the period of early access, going to be the boss of Act 5. When you fight him in Act 5, he's going to have higher stats. Now, this fight is reasonably complex, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of different abilities that the boss has got, and there's also a lot of complex things that you've got to manage. One of the most fundamental things about this fight though, it's an endurance battle. The times that you die, it's not because you get one shot. The times you die, it's instead because you go to press your life flask and you realize, oh, I run out of charges because 2 minutes ago, I made a mistake. That's something you've got to keep perpetually in your mind. I'm going to put up some footage of this fight, and I'm also going to showcase all of his moves and give you some tips on how to counter all of them. I also think that with online boss guides, there's never enough failures shown. And I think it's really important to see some of the things that can go wrong. So the footage that I'm playing is going to be from when I was learning the fight. You'll see a bunch of mistakes in there. You'll see a number of times that I die, and some of those will be potentially insightful, but I'll discuss all of the lessons as well. Firstly though, let's talk the texture of the fight. This is a 4-phase fight that takes place in 2 different arenas. The first and second phases are pretty similar, but in the second phase, there's a couple of nasty new abilities that can really change things up. The third and fourth phases are also pretty similar, but the fourth phase gives Jamanra what you might term his ultimate ability. The phases transition at 85%, 65%, and 20% of his life. When he gets to 20%, you're going to be in trouble really soon, because that's when Jamanra is going to throw everything he's got at you. Hopefully, you've still got some life flasks left. So I was mentioning before that failure in this fight is not usually a case of getting one shot. You don't go from a full life to 0 in a quarter of a second. Instead, you have no flask charges left, and you find yourself in a spot where you're sort of snookered. If you stand still, Jamanra is going to hit you for 350 or 400 damage with one of his attacks. If you dodge left, you'll go into a whirling sandstorm that's going to cost you 300 life to cross. And if you dodge right, you're going to go into an electrical beam that's going to cost you 250 life to cross. You dodge right, taking the lesser evil, and it's still enough to take you out of the equation. You found yourself with nowhere to run and whittled down. That's what a failure in this fight tends to look like. And trust me, I had a bunch of them when I was gaining footage for this video. So your overarching strategy here can be summed up in 4 words. Conserve life flasks ruthlessly. You want to try to get to that final phase, that 20% HP phase, with enough life flasks left that you can really spam them during this super dangerous phase, because Jamanra is not going to mess around anymore at this point. Let's talk about things before you go into the fight though. The boss is going to deal physical and lightning damage to you, and so lightning resistance helps. The higher your lightning resistance, the easier you'll find the fight. I do think a lot of people may have gone into this with 75% lightning resistance and then have found it quite easy, but I certainly went in there with quite low. A good life flask is also mandatory, absolutely mandatory, and you need to unlearn some Path of Exile 1 habits. In Path of Exile 1, a good life flask is one that gives you instantaneous recovery when you press the button, and it also cleanses an ailment at the same time. In Path of Exile 2, you want something very different. You want additional charges. There's a whole bunch of different additional charges mods. I'm not going to recommend any particular one. They're all good. And you want something that increases the throughput of the flask as well. So you could have something like 60% increased recovery and gain 0.15 flask charges per second. This is an example of a good life flask, at least assuming it's the level 30 base life flask, which you definitely want to have. If you don't have a level 30 base life flask, just repeat the previous zone until you've got one. The other stat though that I want to advocate that you bring into this fight is passive life regeneration. So this is just life regeneration per second, whether this comes from the passive tree or whether it comes from explicit mods on rare items. Both of these are viable ways of getting it, but you do want to have some of this passive life recovery. If you can get 12 or 13 points of passive life recovery, that's going to make the fight more manageable. If you can get 25, it's likely to be enough to make it quite easy. This is going to help you a lot over a fight that takes 5 minutes typically. So the boss phases, we've kind of already touched on this. He has about 141,000 hit points in Act 2, and in Act 5 during early access, it's going to be something in the 690,000 range, I believe. Phase 1, down to 85%. Phase 2, 65%. Then there's an intermission, then down to 20%, then until he's dead. Now, something really confusing about this fight that took me a long time to work out. Jamanra has a number of catchphrases he'll utter over the course of the fight. He'll utter these catchphrases when he uses a skill, but the vast majority of these catchphrases are not tied to the skill that he's using. And this threw me off. I was looking for patterns. There are, however, a couple of catchphrases that are tied to certain skills, or that almost always are tied to certain skills. We'll cover those when we get to phase 3 because that's where they become important. Particularly his overhead sword slam and his 10,000 spears moves. These are ones you really want to dodge, and they have unique voice cries. So if Jamanra starts the wind up animation for them when you're off screen because you're dodging something else, but you happen to hear him say, "We will blot out the sky," well, you know what to do. Alright, so phase 1, the overview here is just a reminder. This fight is a marathon, not a sprint, and ideally you want to pass into phase 2 with full life flasks remaining. This is definitely going to be a goal throughout the entirety of the fight, is to use as few life flasks as possible, but it will not necessarily be possible to get through phase 2 without using life flask charges. Phase 1 though, you definitely can. So in phase 1, he's going to have a number of abilities. Let's start with one of the most basic ones, which is his spear throw. He throws the spear at the player. There's a small wind up. Now I time this to be about 750 to 800 milliseconds. That's just by watching it in slow motion and having a look at counting the frames that it takes. It is possible but very difficult to dodge this skill. Now you can dodge roll. I don't think you can move fast enough just by walking to get out of the way of this, but you can dodge roll out of it. And if you do that, you'll save yourself a bit of health. It's not essential to do this, but it will definitely put you in a better position if you can. Now it appears that this actually hits the player 3 times. None of the individual hits are that hard, but I've just been paying attention to the way that my Arctic armor ticks down 3 times when I'm struck by this. So I think it hits 3 times over the course of 2 server ticks. I believe a server tick is still 1/30th of a second in Path of Exile 2, same as Path of Exile 1. This deals physical and lightning damage, but it's mostly physical. Now this action, it ties Jamanra up for 1.5 seconds, but the way that that works is he starts his wind up, then about in the middle of that 1.5 seconds the attack actually goes off, but then he's recovering from it. It's like he stuns himself when he uses this ability, but the stun is quite brief. Option 1, when he uses this ability, just use it as a DPS window and endure the attack. Option 2 is attempt to dodge roll out the way. The second ability though, and this is one you kind of have to interact with, the Twin Pillars. Jamanra is going to spend 1.5 seconds conjuring 2 pillars in the air. They're then going to move down to different battlefield locations. Now the location that he chooses seems to be 4 meters away from the boss, and they're not directly in front of him, but they're offset by 30 degrees. So basically think of it as, imagine Jamanra is at the center of a clock, he's facing the 12, he's going to put them at the 1 and the 11. You want to get quite some way away from these because they do strike in an AoE. You can see the footage of this skill in action here, and you can see it slowed down now to 25% of normal speed. So he spends 1.5 seconds conjuring the pillars and positioning them, and then over the next second they fall to the ground and they do pretty significant damage. This seems again to be mostly physical with some lightning. The third phase 1 ability is his lightning arc. This one is something that I think might be a little bit more mean if you're melee, whereas that last one is something that's more likely to be a problem if you're a ranged character. So Jamanra is going to spend 2.5 seconds channeling lightning from each of his hands. He will start out holding his hands in front of him, and then he'll sweep them outwards. And he'll rotate them far enough that each one of them has moved 90 degrees. So if Jamanra is at the center of a clock, what he's going to do is he's going to be facing the 12, he's going to hold the beams pointing at the 12 for a full half second, and after that he's going to move his right hand out to the 3 and his left hand out to the 9, and it's going to take them 2 seconds to do that rotation. Now this deals damage over time, and it doesn't seem to be too bad if you just get nicked by it, but you don't want to ignore it. You don't want to stand your ground in this. If he does start doing this ability, just duck out of the way. It's not too bad to cross this lightning arc, but you don't really want to stand in it for any protracted period of time. In fact, you definitely don't want to stand in it for any protracted period of time. Okay, so that's the basis of phase 1. Now we've got phase 2, which is all of the phase 1 abilities plus 2 new ones. Now it appears that phase 2 always starts with the channeled storm. This is the most complex of his abilities, so let's watch it in detail. I'm going to play it once at 100% speed, then I'm going to play it again at 30% speed. This is a long ability, and it's one that dominates the entire arena as well. Now this ability is reasonably easily handled, but it is a certain kill if you don't act quickly to get into the safe spot. You need to quickly identify where the safe spot is, and that's the biggest danger here. Jamanra is going to conjure a storm that covers the entire arena. This deals damage over time. It starts out as chip damage, but it escalates to pretty deadly damage once the storm is well established. I was timing it frame by frame and just looking at how much life I lost when I stood in it, and sometimes I was losing 20 life per frame, so that's 600 life per second. That is going to crush you even if you've got a life flask active. Now there's only one safe spot in the arena, and this is behind the Sekhmet. Now this safe spot is a bit hard to identify by sight. The Sekhmet herself is not that easy to see. What's easy to see is the shield that she puts up to block it. However, once you're inside this area, it's a bit tricky to see where the boundary of it is, and so you want to be quite careful. Just check your life total. Now the trickiest part of this is that the Sekhmet can be off screen when Jamanra starts this ability. She'll always be in the top left or bottom left of the arena, or at least close to one of these spots. The storm's going to persist for 15 seconds, during which Jamanra can only do 2 other actions. The first one is to conjure really weak minions named King's Attendant. These King's Attendants will deal negligible melee damage to you. It can kind of add up though, if you get a whole bunch of them onto you at once. The other thing you can do, and this can be a little bit more scary, is you can corpse explode those King's Attendants, and this corpse explosion deals lightning damage. Now this lightning damage is the most common spot that you get shocked in this fight, and getting shocked in this fight is bad news, because if you accidentally go out into the storm at all, then you're in for a world of hurt. So keep this one in mind. These are more dangerous than they look. It is fine to endure all the corpse explosions. They're not going to be a big threat and kill you, but you don't want a situation where Jamanra corpse explodes one of them, and then you've got a bunch of other King's Attendants still attacking you, and then you start to panic because, oh, I'm taking a whole bunch of damage, I better run, and you panic by running out into the storm. That's how you die during this phase. Either you don't recognize where the Sekhmet is in time, or you panic and you run out into the storm trying to dodge these King's Attendants. Now the channeled storm lasts for 15 seconds, but then Jamanra essentially stuns himself for 5 seconds on top of that. So this is a free window to deal damage, as well as to clean up any remaining King's Attendants. So let's talk about the whole of the channeled storm ability. Firstly, you need to break off from Jamanra as soon as you recognize that this skill is happening. You need to quickly identify the Sekhmet and stand about a meter behind her. The safe zone is narrower and longer than it looks, and if you take damage, it's going to be from a King's Attendant you can't see, so use a close range skill that can hit something that is on top of you. The second ability that he gains in phase 2, and I actually can't rule out he might be able to do this in phase 1. I didn't have any footage of him using it in phase 1. Every time that I had video of this ability, it was in phase 2, but I'm not going to promise you that it doesn't exist in phase 1 either. So, Jamanra conjures 2 electrically charged posts. These are going to last for 10 seconds. An electric arc appears between them, and these posts are going to chase the player sometimes. The other thing they can do is they can run around the arena in circles. But if they're chasing the player aggressively, this is the dangerous version. If they're just going around the arena, they're pretty easy to dodge. Being caught between the posts deals you damage over time, and this can get dangerous very quickly. Now the way you want to deal with this is to remember, in the first 2 phases, life flasks are for 2 things. The first one is undoing your big mistakes. The second one is for dealing with this horrible, horrible skill. If Jamanra casts the version that chases the player, you're likely to take hundreds of damage even if you try to dodge it, and literally 1,000 damage or more if you just try and stand your ground and endure it. For that reason, don't try and stand your ground and endure it. You want to try to dodge this, endure the damage that you take when you make mistakes, or when you're just imperfect at being able to get out of the way, and this is not really a good window for DPS. On the flip side, if you cast the more mundane version of it, the one that doesn't chase you around, that's a lot safer, and that is a good window to deal DPS to the boss. Well, congratulations. You got him down to 65%. You might be thinking, oh, he's not doing anything at the moment. Why don't we just go and beat him up a bit more? Well, any damage that you do past the phase transition is going to be erased at the end of this. So, kick back, watch a lore event, let your mana fully recover without using a flask, and potentially gain back a lot of your health and all your energy shield as well. You've got 13.5 seconds for a breather. It's not long enough to go and get yourself a coffee, but it will feel like it in the middle of this fight. Catch your breath, you're going to need it soon. Phase 3, let's start with an overview here. Jamanra is going to have completely new abilities at this point. Some of his deadly abilities now will have voice cues, so you want to be listening out for them. He's going to use a sword, an axe, and a whip in this phase, and he'll swap around between them a lot. It is, however, hard to tell them apart in the chaos of battle. The whip is just his auto attack. We're not going to talk further about that one. Now he can also conjure electric fences as he can in phase 2, but they're even easier to deal with than the easier version of the phase 2 electric fences. They're just something that's there. They're more of an arena hazard than anything else, and they're not particularly bad ones. There are also a lot of arena hazards in this fight. There'll be electrified balls, there'll be the sandstorms that we'll get to in a sec, there'll be those electric fences. There's a bunch of just nasty things in the arena, all of it manageable, but they all constrain your ability to dodge Jamanra's abilities. This is a phase that is all about Jamanra, but Jamanra is going to be amped up by the fact that sometimes you've got to dodge some of the arena hazards as well. So let's start with the first ability, the Sand Tornado. Jamanra seems to always start this phase with this ability. He'll start the phase by summoning a tornado that moves slowly and it deals significant damage over time. This is the easiest thing in the world to dodge, but while you're dodging it, of course, you've got to then be able to dodge Jamanra's abilities as well. It does hurt, but it's not so deadly that you can't dodge through the tornado if you need to. So just keep that in mind. It's something you want to avoid, but it's better to be hit by it for a second or so than it is to be hit by his more deadly skills. Run around this if you can, through it if you absolutely and utterly must. Now we get to the dangerous one, the overhead sword slam. This is the ability that killed me the most times when I was learning this fight. It really does chunk you hard, and there's a big wind-up for this move, but it's often hard to tell. This is one of the abilities that has a very, very important voice cue. Now, fair warning, there is not just one way that Jamanra will say the Forge of Hate. Now, when it comes to these voice cues, there are actually multiple different ways that Jamanra will say the words Forge of Hate, just with different tones. Likewise, the voice actors clearly recorded Take Our Hate and Our Gift to You a few different ways as well. So there's something like 10 different voice lines that he'll use for this cue. What I personally listen for is the words hate and the word gift. If I hear one of those, then I work to the assumption it's an overhead sword slam. That said, he does have a couple of other RNG voice cues that he'll use that will use the word hate in them as well. So you get the odd false positive, but this is the system that works for me. I'm listening out for those two words. If I hear one of them, then I act. Likewise, when we come to 10,000 Spears, there's a couple of voiceovers for that as well you need to listen out for. If he says one of these words, he is already quite a bit into the wind-up for this skill. He's going to perform the skill about 750 milliseconds after starting the final word of that cue. So if it's Forge of Hate, then about 750 milliseconds after he starts the word hate, that's when it's going to go off. If it's Our Gift to You, it's about 750 milliseconds after the word you. Keep an eye on him when you hear one of these things. I think it's easier to go by visuals. This is one where dodge rolling is good. So the most common mistake that I made here, and I made this so many times when I was learning this, I'd try and dodge it too soon. So he would say Forge of Hate, and during the of, I would hit the dodge roll button. Now at this point, when he actually does go donk on the head, he connects with me because he chooses his target later. Jamanra locks in his targeting decision quite late. The best approach here is that if you see him winding up the ability or you hear one of the trigger phrases, what you want to do is maintain a set distance from the boss and just start walking in circles around him, just in a circular pattern. This way he's going to miss you by a moderate amount because he's going to target you where you were like half a second or so ago, and that's going to end up missing. If you do decide to dodge roll low, do it about a quarter or a third of a second later than feels natural. That's the way to avoid dodge rolling too early. It's much more common to dodge roll too early than it is to dodge roll too late with this skill. The next ability we need to talk about in phase 3 is the hard-hitting ability that is probably almost always going to hit, the Exile Sweep. Now this deals significant damage and it's a very, very different attack pattern to the overhead sword slam, but it has one thing in common with the overhead sword slam, and that is that the wind-up looks very similar. The big difference is that for the Exile Sweep, Jamanra's vocalizations do not follow the pattern of always using one of 3 of them. He'll just pick something at random from his entire list. Now, it is possible to dodge this ability. The main ways that you would dodge this is either by ducking further away from Jamanra, or alternately by dodging to get behind him. Both of these are viable, depends on exactly how close you are to him at the time. However, this is very hard to dodge, and if you time it wrong, you'll lose the spell you were casting that you cancelled out of, and you'll also end up not succeeding and you'll still get hit anyway. So keep that in mind. My usual strategy is simply to endure this ability. That's what your life flasks are for. There'll be enough of them to get you through this phase if you're only using them on the Exile sweeps, and maybe like a couple of other little things where you make a mistake. And now we go from something that is possible to dodge but very hard to dodge to something that is very, very essential to dodge. 10,000 Spears. This is a dodge or die attack. And you could technically tank it, but it's going to really, really rip your health pool apart. After a 3-second delay, about 7 spears will rain from the sky, targeting where you are standing about 2 seconds into the cast, so about 1 second before the first of these comes down. Now the spears appear to take about a second to fall, so from looking at this frame by frame, I think that the first one strikes the ground 3 seconds into the cast exactly, the 7th one 4 seconds into the cast exactly, and the other ones at approximately 1/6 of a second intervals in between. Not 100% certain on that, but that's what it looks like. Now, getting hit by all 7 of these is going to rip you apart. Getting hit by one of them is fine. Getting hit by 2 or 3, it's just a minor hit. It's the sort of chip that adds up and can cause you a little bit of a problem. Now, there are 2 different voice lines for this skill. We will blot out the sun or 10,000 spears. The 3 to 4 second death timer starts at the first syllable of this call, but they'll target the position you're in about 2 seconds into the cast. There is no need to start moving quickly, but you do need to move at full speed towards the end of this ability going off. You don't necessarily need to dodge roll, but you do need to be walking away from the spot that you're at, and you need to keep moving until you're confident that at least 5 of the 7 have landed. Anywhere will do, just don't stand where you were back when the voice call for this skill went off. Now we go and discuss Phase 4. In this, Jamanra is going to have all his Phase 3 abilities, but he's got one new one that causes the ultimate arena hazard here. This is the Machinegun portal. Now these appear to have a cooldown of 17 seconds based on my timing of them, and they appear to last for 30 seconds. So 2 of them can and usually will be active all the time, starting from 17 seconds into Phase 4. Keep that in mind, because once that happens, you've got a lot less room to dodge. So let's talk about the Machinegun portal, shall we? This ability conjures a portal that projectiles are going to fly out of that are going to cross the entire arena. One of these is going to go northwest to southeast, the other one is going to go northeast to southwest, so crossing it. When one of the portals expires, Jamanra can recreate it in a new position. They're going to split the arena into 4 safe spots, but they're not going to be of equal size to each other, because he doesn't seem to put them in 50-50 splits. Instead, there'll be a small side and a large side of each of the portals. So this is going to mean that there's going to be 1 tiny safe area, 2 small safe areas, and 1 large one. You want to fight in the large one if that is at all possible, but this is where those tornadoes start becoming annoying, because they like to come towards you, and they'll get in the way, and they'll start causing you to have a little bit less fun if you end up standing on top of one of them. So keep that in mind, that can be a real problem. You will probably need to duck through the machine guns at some points in order to dodge some of Jamanra's other skills. Now it's no longer worth even attempting to dodge the Axe Arc sweep. You want to endure it and let the life flask keep you alive. Standing inside the line of the fire of one of these machine gun portals and fighting is not an option. Crossing one is. It's typically going to cost you about 400 health, so don't do it lightly, but if you have to, you have to. And that's why you've got life flasks at the end. The fight is much harder while both of these portals are active. You're going to need to balance. One half of you is going to want to go reckless all-out offense, but you probably won't have enough life even if you constantly use a duration-based life flask to get through this phase doing that. The other half of you is going to say, let's not worry about DPS at all, and let's try and just dodge everything the boss does. Obviously, that's not a strategy that can win either. You're going to need to balance the two, and that's where this phase can become so difficult. You need to be able to handle the dangers of the machine gun portals, while also not getting squished by his new attacks. So that's all the abilities, and ultimately that's most of the strategy as well. But I want to just condense it all into one final little guide here. In phases 1 and 2, you want to conserve resources. Most notably, you want to conserve life flask charges. It is better to be slow and steady, methodically dodging what you can, except for the electric fences. Those you're going to need to use the life flask charges to endure, at least if you get the type that chase you. In phase 3, dodge the arena hazards, dodge the overhead sword slam, endure the rest. When the boss hits 20%, be ready to run immediately if the machine gun portal spawns on top of your current location. Additionally, 17 seconds later, you might need to run again. That's going to be in phase 4. Phase 4, stay in the largest quadrant when possible and the medium-sized ones when this is necessary. Ruthlessly avoid the small one. The small one's terrible because you can't dodge anything. You're pretty safe while you've got life flask charges left. It's not like Jamanra is going to rip you apart in a second, but they won't last forever, so you'll need to apply damage whenever it's safe. And that is Jamanra. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and may you get more interesting loot from Jamanra than you're about to see me get here.
This is not over. Not yet. Jamanra! I return you to the embrace of death! It is done.